What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, March 14th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's been a very busy news day, a lot of stuff going on we need to get into. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, some very sad news. Physicist Stephen Hawking has passed away at the age of 76, and he was a very brilliant man, although obviously, longtime readers know I disagree with him about I disagree with him about the Big Bang. I disagree with all of established science about the Big Bang. But he was definitely an amazing man, and he was inspirational for doing what he did, dealing with the medical problems that he had. I remember when he did the cameo on Star Trek, where he played himself, which, by the way, is the only time anybody ever played themselves in the entire Star Trek franchise. So that was rather amazing and fun to watch here. Stephen Hawking, had reason to be concerned about his impending death. He'd been ill for a while here. Stephen Hawking did not believe in an afterlife. He described it as a fairy story. There is no heaven, to which I would add there is no hell or heaven, but what we make here on earth. But he will be missed. He was definitely one of the great ones. No question about that. Now, as you know, the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee have written a report basically saying they have found absolutely no evidence of collusion. Peter King is out there saying, no, there's absolutely no evidence of collusion. The Democrats are throwing a tantrum and saying there's significant evidence of collusion, and they're being led by Adam Schiff, who's out there with his bulging eyes and saying, no, there's collusion. There was definitely collusion. We have lots of evidence. They won't show it to us, of course. Supposedly, they're writing their own report to counter the Republican report. It's probably going to be as big a disaster as the Democratic response to one of the other reports that came out earlier, in that it's all going to be based on hearsay and guesswork and no hard actual facts, but they're still trying to keep this thing going. And here's the real danger. If Donald Trump does not clean up our election system, the Democrats are going to steal Congress this November, and they will move to impeach him on whatever flimsy excuse they can have. They just absolutely hate the man. And I will concede I'm very disappointed in President Trump in a lot of areas. But he is the president, and we cannot allow election fraud to steer the future course of this nation. Now, interestingly enough, there's been a new development out of the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, which has recommended the immediate firing of former FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He's basically on leave until he can officially retire on March 18th and collect his pension. But the Office of Professional Responsibility is recommending McCabe be fired and his pension forfeited. And now, of course, the decision is up to Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Now, McCabe's pension over his expected retirement is worth $1.8 million. And I hope Sessions actually does move on this to send a signal to all of these corrupted individuals in the Department of Justice and the FBI saying the times are a-changing. There's a new sheriff in town. You got to clean up your act. Not that the FBI has ever learned. They got caught with their pants down during COINTELPRO. They're still playing the same games today here. Now, a lot of people are talking about Mike Pompeo being nominated to be the new Secretary of State. And a lot of people are out there criticizing this, basically saying this is a bad idea. Krieger is out there saying it's impossible to overstate how terrible Mike Pompeo is. And when he was director of the CIA, unelected public servant, he was out there demonizing WikiLeaks as a fraud, coward, and enemy. Pompeo's talking point, unsupported by fact, was that WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service, a dagger aimed at America's constitutional right to receive honest information about their government. In fact, he's got it exactly wrong. Pompeo also has declared that China is a greater threat to the U.S. than Russia. And apparently, this is a breaking story. Rand Paul is vowing to block confirmation in the Senate. We're going to take a phone call from Rob in New York. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Rob, are you there? I do not hear you. Going once, going twice. I can't hear Rob. All right, back to the news. Now, a lot of people are also looking at the nomination of, well, the selection of Gina Haspel. And of course, the feminists are out there saying, oh, it's a fine time that we had a woman in charge of the CIA. But she is a career spy master, and she once ran an agency prison in Thailand where terror suspects were subjected to torture. Now, already the corporate media is trying to downplay it and say, well, it was just harsh interrogation. It doesn't really rise to the level of torture. And yet everybody who's experienced things like waterboarding is saying, yes, it's torture. And apparently, their story that we have at whatreallyhappened.com, the Israelis were teaching the torture masters at Abu Ghraib to use a torture tool called the Palestinian chair. So, yeah. Now, Haspel also carried out or helped carry out an order that the agent destroy all the videos of the waterboarding sessions in order to evade a Justice Department investigation, which of course ended without charges. So this is not a good person to have inside or as head of the CIA. All right, let's try another phone call. Rick in North Carolina. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I just had a question about voting, and I think I've heard you say one time before that tax is theft. Is that correct?
Well, a lot of people have said that. It's hardly original with me. Some of the founding fathers said the power to tax is the power to destroy. And taxation is about more than simple revenue raising. It is about exerting control over the economy at the personal level.
Okay, now my question then is voting encouraging theft?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you clearly on that one. Can you try that again?
Yeah, is voting encouraging theft?
I would say indirectly, if the people that we're voting for keep raising the taxes, there's no question about it. But in a nation with elections as crooked as ours, it may be the American people haven't actually voted in the government for decades now.
But still, all our politicians and all government is going to do is tax the people. So when we go and vote, it's as though you're just encouraging theft.
Well, I mean, this nation ran without a personal income tax for the first part of its life. In fact, there was an early effort to impose an income tax on the people that was struck down by the Supreme Court because the Constitution forbids direct non-apportioned taxation. And then supposedly because of the 16th Amendment, that made it legal. Although the 16th Amendment, setting aside the questions of whether it was actually ratified or not, the 16th Amendment does not explicitly repeal the portion of the Constitution that bans non-apportioned direct taxation. It's a complicated issue.
Okay, well, that was my question. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Can we try and see if Rob in New York is still on the line? Rob, are you there? Rob? Okay, I guess we lost Rob. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. It looks like there are going to be more shakeups at the White House, and apparently the Zionist lobby, backed by Sheldon Adelson, is working very hard to oust McMaster, who's the current national security advisor. And now they want to get, they basically shoved out Michael Flynn. Now they want to shove out H.R. McMaster. And apparently the neocons, or the Israeli lobby, is pushing for John Bolton to be the national security advisor. And Bolton, of course, is hardcore neocon. He's never met a war he didn't like, Israel supporter. So unfortunately, it looks like in the war between the White House and the swamp appears to be winning at the moment. Now, they had a special election in Pennsylvania yesterday. The Democrat is claiming a win, but it is a razor-thin majority, and the provisional ballots have not yet been counted. The Republicans are already going to demand a recount, and apparently Fox News is reporting that attorneys are filing for the voting machines to be compounded and gathered for inspection due to numerous reports of miscalibration where people were trying to vote for Kaonohi and instead wound up recording votes for Lamb. And so apparently these electronic voting machines were being rigged, and apparently GOP attorneys were blocked from observing the absentee ballot counts by Allegheny County election supervisors. They're not supposed to do that. Now apparently somebody actually got on Twitter and bragged about destroying Republican absentee ballots. And I mean, once again, massive election fraud. Why does nobody want to fix this problem? It will be the end of Donald Trump. It's the end of our country if we don't get this fixed. Now, apparently something else that Democrats were doing is they were blocking people from voting, claiming that there had been a redistricting and they were in the wrong polling place. But the special election was based on the old previous district lines. And a lot of people are on Twitter saying that they went to vote and the election supervisor wouldn't let them. So once again, massive, in-your-face, obvious election fraud. Why is nobody doing anything about this? We cannot allow election fraud to determine the future course of our nation. It is that serious. Without an honest election system, we, the people, are helpless to stop this corrupt government from becoming even more corrupt than it already is. Now, Hillary is still on her little tour. She's taking a few days off. She sprained her hand, and the doctors advised her to rest, so she's canceled a few appearances in India. And she's still going around the world touting her book, What Happened, and making excuses for why she lost. And in the process, she has once again insulted the majority of Americans who voted for Donald Trump by describing them as backwards hillbillies and living in flyover country. That really only the liberals that live along the coastline should be allowed to vote in elections in the first place. But she just can't accept the fact that we, the American people, just don't like her. We don't like the criminality. We don't like her personality. We don't like the way she cackled about the death of Muammar Gaddafi. She's not a nice person. And we don't want her as in elected office anymore. And apparently, I'm hearing that the Democratic Party is getting really sick and tired of Hillary Clinton. She's become an albatross around their necks. If she's actually thinking about running again in 2020, I don't know that she's going to get very far, because the Democrats are, their support base is collapsing because of the embarrassment of Hillary Clinton. And as long as she's out there in the public eye, it's reminding everybody of how the Democratic National Committee cheated Bernie Sanders during the primaries, and again, massive election fraud in the 2016 elections. And the Democrats are trying to move away from that, and Hillary won't let them. Now, as you know, we were talking the other day about lawfare. This is where powerful people who don't like the independent media will sue the independent media. Not in the expectation that they're going to win, but just in an effort to drive the independent media into bankruptcy, because they've got all the money and we do not. And it turns out the lawyer who's suing Gateway Pundit and Alex Jones worked for the same firm that put 4 lawyers, including Robert Mueller himself, on the special counsel. So, again, this is pure politics that is out there. All right, let's turn to the war zones. There's a lot going on over there. The Syrian army has liberated key areas in southern Damascus. The fighting is getting very serious. They entered the area of Al-Qadam in southern Damascus after local militants had been evacuated from it. Remember, the other day we reported the militants on this Russian brokered deal are surrendering their weapons and being allowed to leave, and they are. Now, ISIS launched an attack on Al-Qadam, seeking to capture the area before it could be secured by the Syrian Arab Army, but they failed on that one. Now, there are a lot of Russian advisors, representatives of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of Opposing Sides, and servicemen in Damascus and at Syrian defense facilities. That is an important thing to remember for one of the following stories. Now, Russia is saying they have information that the United States plans to bomb the government quarter in Damascus. They're going to go for a decap strike on an invented pretext. And Russia is saying it will respond militarily if Russian lives were threatened by such an attack. So we're getting really, really close on this. Valery Gerasimov, the head of Russia's general staff, said Moscow had information that rebels in the enclave of eastern Ghouta were planning to fake a chemical weapons attack against civilians and blame it on Syria. And Gerasimov says the United States intends to use the fake attack as a pretext to bomb the government in Damascus. And they're telegraphing they're going to do that. Nikki Haley is up at the United Nations insisting that Russia failed to ensure Syria destroyed all of its chemical weapons. Well, Nikki doesn't have a good grasp of history, because when Russia brokered that deal for Syria to get rid of its chemical weapons, it was done so under a team of international observers. So it wasn't entirely up to Russia. And all the international observers said, yes, we've gone everywhere. We can't find any of the stuff here. And the propaganda is really starting to jump the shark. Story out of freebeacon.com. U.S. monitoring possible North Korean military base in Syria. And this is really over the top. The claim is that North Korea has built a secret underground base, which somehow showed up on satellite photography, from which North Korea and Syria will launch chemical and nuclear weapons. So they're really, really pushing the propaganda. Now, the Syrian Arab Army found an underground chemical facility in Al-Shifonia in East Ghouta, and the terrorists were using it to develop chemical weapons. They also found a guide on how to do all this from a Saudi chemical industrial company. The container for some of these chemicals was made by an Italian firm, Flanox. Now, Moscow believes that the threats to Damascus to use force against Syria are unacceptable, and Russia's permanent representative to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, Alexander Shulgin, has said on Wednesday, after the Nikki Haley statement about readiness to act militarily on Syria, he basically says the terrorists have the toxic agents. They've got the components for all kinds of deadly gases, especially chlorine. They're the ones doing this. It's an obvious false flag. Story coming out of IntelliHub. The Pentagon has been caught falsifying the paperwork for weapons transfers to the Syrian rebels. And apparently this is a report issued by 2 international weapons monitoring groups confirming the Pentagon continues to ship record-breaking amounts of weaponry into Syria, and that the Department of Defense is scrubbing its own paper trail. This is coming from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project and the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. And they found conclusive evidence that not only is the Pentagon currently involved in shipping $2.2 billion worth of weapons from a shady network of private dealers to the terrorists in Syria, mostly old Soviet weapons, but is actually manipulating paperwork such as end-user certificates, presumably in order to hide the U.S. involvement. And they failed. They have basically failed. All right, we're going to take a short break for commercials here, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And once again, we have to put out the word. Republic Broadcasting needs you. We need your help. We're literally in a war with the deep state, the corporate media, corruption, the war machine, and we need your help. So if you can donate, the address for a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to phone on in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, that number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And don't forget this special promotion we have going. It's only for 90 days. And that is where we've partnered with Front Sight Firearms Training, where for a one-time $500 donation to Republic Broadcasting, you will receive a lifetime commander membership at Front Sight Firearms Training, which has all kinds of benefits: low-cost weapons, low-cost ammunition, rentals, the training itself, of course. It's a sweet deal. If I lived in the Western U.S., I'd go for this myself. But it's only for the next 90 days. And so, please, we need your help right now. We're in a war. It's a battle, a real one. Now, getting on back to the war zones, a lot of people are concerned, obviously, over Israel's deepening involvement in the Syrian war. Now, earlier this month, Israel launched airstrikes on a dozen Syrian and Iranian targets, or what we're told are Iranian targets. One of them turned out not to be. The Iranian base turned out to just be a Syrian vehicle storage yard. But they launched against these targets after an Iranian drone allegedly entered Israeli airspace. And the founder of the Syrian Al-Qaeda praised the Israel attacks and called for more on Syria. And apparently a top Israeli Air Force official has revealed the Israeli military has carried out thousands of missions in Syria in the last year alone. Now, the Lebanese government, on the other hand, has condemned Israel for repeatedly violating its airspace in order to launch attacks on Syria. Lebanon has filed a formal complaint with the United Nations, but Israel is continuing the airstrikes. And obviously, if this complaint goes up to the Security Council, Nikki Haley will stand up there and go, veto, 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 veto. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. And Mike, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia got rid of their chemical weapons. I don't know if you remember, this was last year. The last of their chemical weapon shells was destroyed. But remember, you had like Uzbekistan, which supposedly, when they disabled everything, that was where that Novichok, which the UK says that's what it is. We don't know because, we're not there. We don't see the stuff physically. But that was made in Uzbekistan. But supposedly the U.S. helped clean up, that chemical factory in Uzbekistan, because I think Uzbekistan's like it was an independent nation now or sovereign country or whatever. But like, what was from stopping, the United States elements from getting that sample, you know what I mean? And just backward engineering it. And
they don't even have to get it. A lot of stuff went missing with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this particular chemical weapon is very unique. It's a binary agent. It's made in two components, so it's safe to transport, and then you mix it together prior to dispersal. But it can be made out of common industrial chemicals, which you can't regulate and control because they're in too much commercial use. So anybody can make this stuff, including Porton Down. The recipe is not a secret anymore. And, obviously a lot of people are concerned that this stuff is out there and the recipe for this is out there. But we were going to cover this in depth when we got down to Great Britain threatening some kind of action against Russia over this poisoning. But it's an obvious hoax. Remember, Great Britain is the nation that gave us the dodgy dossier. And this is just more of the same.
And Porter Down's only 4 to 6 miles away from this incident, Mike. Not only that, Mike, but this is a checkerboard move. And Russia doesn't do checkerboard moves. Like you said, they're chess players.
Yes.
This is an obvious checkerboard move by, like I said and you said the other day, like they wouldn't do this. Like, you know what I mean? Like Putin's election's coming up and the World Cup's coming up. There's no reason to do this. Who benefits? Who benefits? It's a long line. We said, from Ukraine coup, with all this stuff with Russia. It's just, like I said yesterday, it was a buildup. It's a slow buildup of demonization and obviously ultimately to a war.
Well, it's not all that slow. I mean, they're just cranking up the war propaganda as fast as they can. And from this, I would conclude that probably the majority of people aren't buying any of this nonsense. We've had too much of it over the last 18 years. And in fact, there's one of the articles that I posted at whatreallyhappened.com where I said, you got to read the comments on this. Nobody is buying this nonsense.
Yeah, especially Mike. We all know they lied about Iraq weapons of mass destruction, baby incubators in the previous war, right? It's just lie upon lie upon lie, and all of a sudden we're expected to believe this crap. I mean, come on, you got to be a real moron to believe anything coming out from the media or the government, not just here, but in the West in general, because they're all on the same page. You know what I mean?
Dustin, hey, Mike, I got to let you go. Dustin, I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to take another commercial break. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be back with more news and more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. The First Amendment's on my mind as usual. Man, this has gotten crazy. I've been listening to a little bit of what Dustin said about it. You know, how do we, believe these regurgitations that the mainstream media and everything is saying? I'm wondering if the lady that came out and apologized to Rex Tillerson, and I can't think of her name, by calling all Christians or, that whole comment, calling them mentally ill or whatever, they came out and apologized. I'm wondering, are they double backing or now coming out and apologizing to get their credibility back, or is this some type of other thing that they're doing?
Well, you're right. They're struggling to get their credibility and their audience back, and what happens is they're pushing as hard as they can on several fronts, and when they push too far and there's a push back from the people, then they'll back off and say, we're sorry that we did that. It's called having a trial balloon. And that's why we're seeing so many different stories like the one about the underground North Korean base in Syria. It's a trial balloon to see if anybody's going to believe it. And if people seem to be believing it, then that is the propaganda path they're going to follow. But we're seeing a lot of trial balloons right now, and they're all popping. Again, I think it was about a week ago, we ran a story about how the intelligence agencies are in a panic because the American people aren't believing the propaganda anymore.
Yeah, and with the intelligence agencies, what I'm seeing is 25% are now coming into Congress. Besides, in the media, a lot of these intelligence operatives are running for offices and things like that.
25% of the Democratic candidates for this November are intelligence operatives.
Yeah, this seems like a coup d'état, a deep state coup d'état against, without it going hot, without it going bloody. But again, I keep thinking about what you always say, sit back, wait, this thing's going to unravel. I got to ask, how much more patient can we all be with this? Because this is getting ridiculous.
Well, obviously, that's an individual choice. And I will admit that there are times I'm very frustrated by how long the process is taking. I was honestly convinced that this government was going to collapse, late last year, and they're still struggling on. But they're holding the whole nation together with spit and baling wire. They're still rigging the stock market. They're still lying about the unemployment numbers. Trump was just out there saying, "Oh, we've got so many fewer jobless things going on here," and yeah, it's all being held together by illusion. It's smoke and mirrors, and there's no substance left inside either the government or the economy. It's just a bunch of people who've seized power, and they're plundering the nation and its people for their own personal gain, and they're going to try and plunder the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, I can see that. This attack with InfoWars coming under the First Amendment, I'll believe, not only InfoWars, but if they take InfoWars down, everybody in the alternative media is next.
Yes.
Or could be next. I hate to say, one person down, my ratings or competition will go up. No. It's to whom the bell tolls.
I agree.
How the story goes. We got to stand up for one another and put our petty little differences aside and stand up for, humanity. I hate to say it like that, but this, we're all, you know, if we want a nation, if we want to continue, we got to put these petty differences aside and be men and women and stand up for what is right for once.
I agree. I absolutely agree. That's why I'm carrying the coverage of this lawfare against InfoWars and Gateway Pundit and all the rest, and I'm fully supportive of their efforts, under the First Amendment. Now, as it turns out, the lawsuit against InfoWars basically involves a witness to that incident at Charlottesville, saying that because InfoWars put up the video of him and it went viral, that he suffered harassment. Now, to me, that's a trivial lawsuit. If you step in front of a media camera and all of InfoWars microphones and cameras are clearly labeled that they're a media organization, you know it's going to go someplace. So it's a frivolous lawsuit, and I hope they find a judge who agrees.
No, I totally agree with you, sir. And like I said, you have my 100% backing and support, and as well as everybody else in the alternative media. I just want to stand up for what's right. I mean, I can't see, so I can't fight a physical war, but I can definitely fight an information war. And I hope you have a great day, and I hope
that's where the revolution is happening, in cyberspace. And that means that ordinary people can go about their business without being concerned about flying shrapnel. The U.S. government has a bad habit of always preparing to win the previous war. They've been refining the weapons that they used to win World War II instead of leapfrogging ahead the way that Russia and China have. And this revolution, and there is one underway, it is an information revolution. Congress is all worried about AK-47s and AR-15s. Nobody's going to be fighting against the government with guns. This revolution is being fought and being won with keyboards.
Yep, absolutely. You're absolutely right, sir. Well, I hope you have a great day and give Miss Claire the best. I hope you have a great and wonderful show.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we're going to switch over to Robert in London. Aloha, Robert. Thank you for waiting patiently. And what's on your mind today?
It's the Russia-UK issue, which I am completely appalled about. Britain is completely wrong in every way and lying through its teeth, in my opinion. And I watched the parliamentary thing on last Monday, and a complete kangaroo court. Everybody was one-sided only. My concern is, just when will Russia get fed up with Britain and, well, with the West, basically? When will Russia lose its patience with the West? Then we're in big trouble. And I see a huge problem. Yeah, it's like really massive. And I missed the beginning of your program because I was watching the Russian UN ambassador speaking at the UN, and the West basically wants to kick Russia out of the security, the inner security council, etc. For this little item. And it is a false flag. This is a complete false flag. And the Russian spokesman said that this chemical, which was the deadly chemical, is actually, it's highly toxic, but it requires two parts. You can carry it around with you in two different containers. Not until you actually mix it does it become dangerous.
Yes.
And the chemicals in the two containers can be locally obtained ingredients, apparently.
Yes.
And the Russian chap said that if Britain knows what the chemical is, then it has the formula to be able to understand what the chemical is. Therefore, it knows how to make it, so therefore it can make it. Portland Down is 20 miles away, or 8 miles away, 8 miles from Salisbury. So, and one theory put by a Russian gentleman who I've seen on TV many times, who I do like, he reckons there could be an ISIS bod, an ISIS man who's come back from Syria somewhere, who's disgruntled and upset with everything, as the British are, losing their place in Syria. And all they do is have to give this chap who doesn't know very much about anything, and he will then very crudely spread it around. It's a very crude job, apparently.
Yes, it is.
It's a professional hit. And it's so basically, you don't need to look any further than 8 miles away between Salisbury and Portland Down Research Centre, which is the top chemical place for UK.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And again, who benefits?
It's a false flag completely.
And
who benefits?
Yeah, who benefits? I mean, it doesn't benefit Putin to do this at this particular time. He's got elections coming up. The World Cup is supposed to be held in Russia. It would be stupid of him to do something this provocative at this time. This benefits the West very, very clearly. Again, look for what should be there and isn't, and what isn't is a motive for Putin to do something like this at this particular time. He gets absolutely nothing from it. It's clearly a false flag.
Sure. So that's my point. All I can say is, I know that you don't like to talk about religion. All I can say is, Putin's personal religion keeps your bum warm on your seat.
Okay, I'll have to think about that one for a while. And Robert, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Chuck in Texas.
Welcome.
Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Keeps your bum warm on your seat.
Chuck, I can barely hear you.
And Robert.
Hello, Chuck? All right, we're going to move ahead with the news here. Now, as you know, civilians are finally being able to get out of East Ghouta, and contrary to the Western media portrayal of the brutal Assad and his soldiers, the civilians are basically just delighted to be part of Syria again. They're talking about, just how horrible conditions were when they were under the control of the U.S.-backed terrorists. And again, it completely contradicts the corporate media's attempt to portray Syria as some kind of a humanitarian mission to save those poor Syrian people from the evil Assad. Okay, looks like we've got Chuck in Texas back. Chuck, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike?
Okay.
Quick comment. Julie called in saying that, we all need to come together. Well, until Alex Jones stops being a Zionist, I personally will not support him in any way, shape, or form, simply because I think he's the pinnacle of controlled opposition. I'll let you comment on that in just a second, Mike. I got a question. I've been having some trouble with my iPhone and Bluetooth connections. This iPhone 4 is, I bought 3 or 4 of them, trying to keep from upgrading. Suggestions on a new phone. What would you think?
Well, I like the iPhone. I've had nothing but bad experiences with anything based on Android, and I'm on an iPhone. This is an iPhone 7 now, and I'm very happy with it. I don't want to have to fuss around with it. Yeah.
I mean, while I'm enjoying my white privilege and working, I'll break a bigger phone. And an iPhone 4 is about as large a phone as I can carry with me and work without shattering the screen constantly.
Well, I'll be very honest. When we upgraded our phones, which actually got us a lower monthly bill from AT&T, amazingly enough, along with 2 free iPads, we got Claire the iPhone 7S, which is the larger one. And in hindsight, I'm almost sorry I didn't get that one as well, because I think I would appreciate the larger screen.
Yeah, I was a working guy. I loved my flip phones, but they got so outdated and couldn't do the things that I needed to do. But even this iPhone 4 is a little larger than I like to have on my belt while I'm banging it around working.
Yeah.
So I enjoy my white privilege by going to do real physical labor. But anyway, I'll let you comment on Alex Jones. I'm afraid that as long as he's going to be a Zionist, when's the man going to realize that buddying up to the enemy does not pay off? They will betray him, and I don't want him. I wouldn't trust him. I'm sorry. At this point, you just can't trust him. Let him go down. Well, and then RBN can pick up the can pick up the slack.
Well, if they succeed in lawfaring InfoWars into bankruptcy, RBN will be next. That's the problem here. And yes, Alex Jones and I definitely disagree on the issue of the government of Israel, but I'm in agreement with that first caller. We have to put that down because the entire independent media is being targeted by corporate media, by corporations, by the war machine, by politicians, and we have to stand united. What was it Ben Franklin said, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately?
Well, I can understand that, but when it's the biggest issue we have, the biggest danger we have in the United States is Israel. And whenever you get right down to push and shove, final analysis, Israel is our problem. Without that influence, we'd be America again.
I agree. We're under foreign puppet rule, and we should be no more comfortable with it than the people of Iraq or the people of Afghanistan or the people of Yemen or the people of Libya.
We'll see how it plays out, and I'll kind of follow you guys' lead. But I'm just real hesitant to. I mean, I sent Alex money, supported him, promoted him, but over Israel, I finally just said, this guy is not on my side. And so I broke free from him and won't support him. I'll support RBN.
Oh, we appreciate your support.
I won't support Alex Jones.
We appreciate your support.
Yeah, I'll have a check in the mail here in the next few days for you guys. But anyway, have a great show as always.
Thank you very much, Chuck. I really appreciate the kind words. And we're going to switch over to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Taxes are on my mind. We had a caller earlier saying that taxes are theft, and I believe that. And next month we're going to be asked for taxes again. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, if you had a friend, even if some people think that taxes are valid, of course they use it to kill people. So I object on that ground too.
So do I.
But if you had a friend, that you gave $21 trillion to, and he lost it, he misplaced it, he can't find it, but he comes to you and wants more.
Yeah, that's a real problem there. And again, that tax money is not being spent on America and Americans. It's not being spent on our infrastructure. It's being spent on war. It's being spent on the illegal immigrants and the refugees, and they give the rest to Israel.
Yep. We have to stop paying taxes.
A lot of people feel that way. Anyway, Kathleen, we have to take a break for commercials, so thank you very much for the phone call, and we will be back after these words from our sponsors. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phone lines. Mike in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. Mike, you've been on the radio, as far as I remember, for at least 25 years. Am I correct?
No, you're not. I've been doing the What Really Happened website in various incarnations. At one point, it was called Rancho Renamucca. I've been doing that for 25 years. I've been doing talk radio for 11 now.
Oh, okay. Well, it's still a long time.
Yes, it is.
I don't know why.
One of these days, I'll figure out how to do it right.
Okay. I was wondering if you were a trader, in commodities or futures at one point or some point in your life.
No, I'm not. I spent the first part of my life with NASA and the second part of my life in the entertainment industry. And I've never owned an issue of stock or a bond or anything. I did invest once in some gold coins, but then I made the mistake of eating the chocolate bit out of the middle, which destroys their value.
Right on. So, yeah, okay. Well, still, I think you recommend, when you do recommend about silver as being an affordable investment, that will retain its value to people, your friends, that you talk to. I'm probably sure. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say here, I was having lunch today, and all of a sudden the stock market dropped 200 points, the Dow Industrials.
Yep.
And and I almost got sick for a minute there. It was a good steak I was eating, but not after that. It's just getting really risky now and very skittish. Any kind of news out of Washington or uncertainty, it's just this market is just ready to go either down or I don't think we're going to be going back up to the highs very soon with all this uncertainty. But the caller that you had, Kathy, that called in, she was making a point about the debt, and I thought that was interesting. I think the future hope for people here on this planet is countries that will start using cryptocurrency as their means of goods and service, money, a form of exchange. Will that happen? I hope so.
Well, we've only got a minute here. Let me cut on in. We've only got a minute here. My enthusiasm for precious metals investing is based on the past history of precious metals. And we also know, of course, that Wall Street, the banks, Federal Reserve are trying to keep the price of the metals low to discourage people from emptying their savings accounts and their stock portfolios and getting into metals. But metals are a good investment because it's a commodity base. The commodity always has value, whether it's Federal Reserve note or cryptocurrency. They're basically based on nothing but what people think they might be worth. And if you go back to the Depression of the 1930s and the collapse of the U.S. dollar back then, people who had invested in silver and gold made out all right. It's less an investment than a wealth preservation strategy, because if this economy crashes, the dollar could be worth absolutely nothing. The same thing with the stocks and bonds. Okay? So I'm going to have to let you go, Mike. We got to take a station identification break. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phone lines, a couple of breaking stories here. As you know, Sessions is considering firing former FBI Deputy Director McCabe just days before he was to retire and receive a huge pension. Still no word on whether that's going forward or not. But now, according to a report in Zero Hedge, Trump plans to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions and replace him with the current EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Personally, I would have preferred to see Larry Klayman in that spot. But Sessions has done hardly anything at all. And he's certainly not going after the deep state. So we'll see what's going to be breaking on that. So back to the phones here. David in Lake Arrowhead. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mike?
I'm doing good.
Not everybody asks you that. All right. I just wanted to address the fella a couple of calls ago that wanted to know about a smaller iPhone. And they make one. I have it. It's actually just a silly millimeter higher than the iPhone 4, and that's about the same width. And it's actually thinner. It's the iPhone SE Special Edition, and it's equivalent to about an iPhone 7. So he might want to look into that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention real quick is, how does it happen that Donald Trump can tweet somebody, whatever it is, and fire them over Twitter? I mean, I could see it if it was his lawn boy or something, but it's Secretary of State.
Well, I'm sure that the Secretary of State was notified through official formal channels, and Trump simply announced its existence. But sometimes, bosses get very creative in firing people. I remember a story from several years ago where bosses would have secretaries do the firing. They would use Post-its to say you're fired. There's an apocryphal story, probably not true, that a boss trained a talking parrot to say you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, and then sent the employee into the office where just the parrot saying you're fired, you're fired, you're fired.
Okay, but this is a little bigger than just somebody firing their secretary or something. I mean, this is the Secretary of State and the President. And it just doesn't seem like it's really making America great again to tweet that you're fired. I'm sorry, I just don't. I can't grasp that.
I see it as purely cosmetic. I know a lot of people do not like the fact that the president uses Twitter, but on the other hand, the corporate media distorts everything he says, and Twitter is the one way. Twitter's the one way we're sure we're getting what Trump is actually thinking, good or bad.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I at least it comes from him, but it just seemed really tacky, really tacky.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. And we're going to switch over to Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
No, I agree with you. Sessions must go. Another question I have is that as far as Mueller goes, I guess there was a 50-page memo released saying absolutely no collusion with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So that's a dead end.
Oh, the Democrats are resuscitating it. Adam Schiff is already out there, trying to bring that one back to life, and they're screaming they're going to write their own report and that they have significant evidence of collusion, although, we will wait and see the memo. But it should be over and done with. Mueller found nothing. Mueller has admitted he's found nothing, and he was the person charged with the investigation. But the Democrats don't want to let this go. They're going to drag it all the way out till November.
I guess so, probably will. Hey, I have an economics question for you. I threw up mine John Stadtmiller and Ron McDonald yesterday or Monday, and we didn't get any confirmation, any answer, but I figure you might have an answer for it. Talking about Reaganomics back in the 80s, was it successful, the trickle-down effect of Reaganomics because of deregulation?
No, it really wasn't. Basically, Reagan's tax cuts were a lot like Trump's tax cuts. It was primarily for the wealthy and corporations, and that whole idea of trickle-down economics, it never really did work. Basically, they were setting up a system where the rich are eating at the dinner table, and the American people are basically underneath waiting for a crumb to drop, and precious few crumbs dropped.
Got it. That's it. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the war zones. The United Nations war crimes investigators have basically charged the U.S.-led coalition in Syria with violating international humanitarian law when it launched airstrikes on a school in Syria that killed at least 150 civilians. The U.S. is committing war crimes. Now, this will go nowhere. If it ever gets to the Security Council, Nikki Haley will veto it. But that's the reality of what's going on in the war. And this dovetails with what we were saying earlier about how the civilians who are finally getting out of East Ghouta are praising Assad and the Syrian army and have just described horrible conditions that they had to live under when the U.S.-backed terrorists were in control. Now, getting over to Great Britain and this attack on the Russian spy, and again, to find out if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a reason for Putin to have done this so close to his elections and so close to the World Cup. He gets nothing from it. It is very, very obvious. But Britain has now expelled 23 Russian diplomats over this supposed chemical attack on the Russian double agent. They're talking about yanking the license for Russia Today to broadcast in Great Britain. And Russia has responded by saying that if Russia Today is closed in Great Britain, Russia will ban all British media outlets in Russia. So the war of words is escalating on that. Now, Theresa May is now talking about forcing the entire European Union nations to boycott the World Cup. And of course, if she succeeds in doing that, nobody's going to bother watching the World Cup if the world isn't allowed to be there. Now, not everybody is buying this blame Russia. In fact, as you've heard from some of the phone calls, very few people are buying into this. Jeremy Corbyn is saying there isn't enough proof to conclude Russia was behind this. And Corbyn stood up in Parliament and he challenged the evidence. And you have to look at the chemical that was used. It's called Novichok. And as I mentioned before, it's a binary agent, meaning it is stored as two less toxic chemicals. They're still toxic, but not too terribly. And you can transport it to where it's going to be deployed, in two separate containers. And you mix it and you allow it to react, and this makes the Novichok material. And the problem is that the stuff is all over. It's not uniquely Russian. Anton Utkin, a Russian chemist who worked as UN inspector in Iraq and developed technologies to destroy Russia's chemical weapons, says it's unclear how Britain could establish that it was produced in Russia. He said that anyone familiar with the technology could have produced it. You can't find out who manufactured the chemical weapon. The content of the substance will be identical if you're using the same method anywhere in the world. It's not like there's DNA, which is how they established that the anthrax sent to the media and politicians after 9/11 came from a U.S. military lab. It's not conclusive. Portendown could make this stuff very easily. An ex-MI5 agent, Anne Macon, has also dismissed Theresa May claims that the origin of the nerve agent used to attack the Russian double agent had to come from the Kremlin. And even she is saying from the very start of the story, they need to work out what was the motive. Because this guy had a lot of enemies. And here's where the bombshell comes on in. Russia stopped production of Novichok and destroyed all its reserves to be in compliance with the Treaty on Chemical Weapons. And this was all confirmed by international observers of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Russia doesn't actually have this stuff. So, story coming out of Sputnik News. One of the great hoaxes, Skripal poisoning evokes deja vu of the Iraq war run-up. Remember, Saddam has nukes, Saddam has nukes, Assad has poison gas. So, it's another obvious false flag. Now, we put up an article, Obvious Becks, Putin poisoning plan backfires as world readies to wage World War III on Russia. But if you read the comments section, except for the obvious shills, nobody's buying the nonsense. It really is. It's obvious. It's just too obvious. And there's another article here. This came out of Global Research up in Canada. And they're saying that this hoax regarding Sergei Skripal is an emerging picture of a desperate government. We know that the Western interlinked economies are in a very fragile state. It's been a terrible day on the stock markets. And we have to counter the lies that are coming on out. They're saying that Novichok can only be from a state laboratory. That's false. If you know how to do it, it's easy to produce. You have to take certain precautions, but somebody could set it up. Chemical weapons laboratory, like the terrorists had in Syria. And again, this guy had a lot of enemies. A lot of people had motives to get rid of him. Maybe he was going to go public on what he knew about how Christopher Steele put together that Trump dossier. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and we're going to go back to the phones to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mike? Mike, okay. Two things. One, what the guy was saying about Alex Jones, being a Zionist and all that. First of all, he is not a total, he's not a Zionist the way you think. He doesn't take a stand necessarily against Israel all the time, but he's got people like Steve Pichenik, who says outright that Israel was involved in 9/11. And Pichenik, by the way, is Jewish himself, and he also has Robert David Steele on, people like them. So it's not that he's he's not really a Zionist himself. He does have other people on, and we got to stick together. The alternative media has to stick together, no matter what.
I'm agreeing.
Everybody's differences, right? But
yeah,
anyway,
I agree.
The other thing is about Russia. I thought right away false flag, and you know who I thought right away the biggest suspect is? MI6. This woman, what's her name? Theresa May.
Yes.
She's in trouble. She's very unpopular. She's going against the wishes of the British people. with Brexit. She's not exiting the EU, even though the British people voted for it. She's the British government have made all kinds of blustery remarks about Russia the last couple of months, as it is, and I think they want to make a statement to find an excuse not to go to the World Cup on top of that. So and they are capable of killing people. I mean, talk about Brexit. Look at that woman that was shot conveniently. And by the way, you know how impossible almost it is to get a gun in Britain by a so-called mental patient, who I think was probably MK Ultra or something like that. Remember that?
Yeah.
Before the Brexit vote, it didn't work. People still voted against it, and I think this is what's going on, Mike. Unfortunately, the Western governments are evil today, or at least they're run by evil people.
Yes.
Especially in Europe, even more than the United States. Most of these, leaders don't even have their own children, like Merkel, Theresa May, the guy in France, So I wouldn't say they don't care, but it goes hand in hand. They probably have their bunkers somewhere, and they figure, they'll inherit the Earth after it's gone, after the planet is nuked.
Yep.
And they got what they want. And nuclear war to them is not all as terrible as it once was. When you had JFK and Khrushchev facing off, both started their children and grandchildren above so many other things.
Yes.
Both are rational men. You don't have that today. At least Trump, maybe he'll think of his kids, grandkids, but sometimes Trump just acts so impetuously. I don't know. And I don't like this guy that he just appointed to Secretary of State, Pompeo.
Yeah.
I don't trust that dude.
That's a bad sign.
And I don't like this woman either that he put in there, for the CIA director. So I don't know where we're headed, Mike. Maybe you know. It ain't good.
No, it isn't good. If this goes to nuclear war, and everybody's got their bunkers. I know that they've remember the Greenbrier, this luxury resort in Virginia, and underneath it was this secret bunker where Congress was going to hide out in the case of a nuclear war. And then after the Cold War ended, they basically turned it into a tourist attraction. If you were staying at the Greenbrier, they would take you downstairs and show you where all the stuff is. My understanding is now it's been brought back to active status, and there's all these other bunkers, as Mount Weather, and our government has been bunker happy for quite a long time. If you keep hearing all these stories about people are hearing these mystery drones that sound like a diesel truck idling in the distance, those are tunneling machines, just like the ones they used to dig out the Channel Tunnel. They're a little bit smaller. The U.S. government has been digging in for years now, getting ready for this, and the money junkies, they're buying nuclear-proof bunkers left and right. And so, it's eerily reminiscent of Tom Clancy's book Rainbow Six, and the storyline of that one was the rich, wealthy political elites were going to release a devastating biological weapon that was going to kill anybody who didn't have the special vaccine first, and then they were going to depopulate the planet and let it go back to nature, and they were all going to be happy. And there are people who do think like that. And they're thinking maybe let's just go ahead and nuke the planet, and when the radiation is gone, we'll come on up and we'll just start rebuilding the world all over again.
By the way, you know where he got a lot of his ideas from, Clancy, is the guy I just mentioned, Steve Kuchinek.
Yes.
Who's actually an info. I wish you'd get him on your show, too.
I'll try and get him. I'll try and get him. Okay?
So, he knows all the ins and outs. So anyway, that's basically all I got to say.
All right, well, thank you for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here. Story that's coming out of Blacklisted News saying that Russia's hypersonic missiles didn't surprise America. See, initially after Putin's State of the Union speech and the video behind him, everybody was scrambling. Why didn't we know about this? Why weren't we figuring out ways to counter this? And the CIA was just kind of shrugging. Now they're trying to cover up for that, saying, oh, we knew all along, and they're not really, we don't have to worry about those here. But these weapons have really awed the rest of the world. And much of the rest of the world is hoping that Russia's new weaponry, which is pledged to be used for defensive purposes. It's a deterrent. Russia has a deterrent to deter America's expansion. And everybody's saying, maybe this will calm things down. Maybe we'll be back to the days of mutually assured destruction. But you know, the CIA doesn't have a real good track record with things in that part of the world. They totally missed the Soviet Union going into Afghanistan. They were caught totally by surprise. And they didn't see the coming collapse of the Soviet Union. I would suggest they don't really know what's going on in Russia today. And that's why they were surprised by some of these weapons. And they're just trying to basically cover their ass on that one. But I think at this point, it's safe to say that the corporate media's Trump is soft on Russia narrative can go into the trash can. We were hoping he was going to be soft on Russia. We were hoping that there was going to be some kind of a détente. Donald Trump, the candidate, promised to disengage militarily from the rest of the world. That is probably the biggest one of his campaign promises that he's broken, along with putting Hillary in jail. Now, Angela Merkel has secured a fourth term as Chancellor of Germany after parliamentary approval. And wasn't sure for a while there whether they were going to get the coalition government, but apparently the parliament has just approved her as Chancellor for another term in office. So we're going to have to be dealing with her and her open borders for a while yet. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones to Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. You know, I wanted to... Trump is the only chance that we have. He has to defeat the deep state. If he doesn't do that, then I honestly believe that what we see in the Deagle reports are going to come to pass.
Yes.
And if you notice the Deagle report, yeah, they are basically like, how do you say, one of those predictive programming types, you know, other than in the media, because they do have affiliation with the CIA and intelligence agencies, so they're very credible. And they do have an element of a large percentage of the people that are going to be gone are going to be Caucasian. If you notice that, if you look at that, you know, the list.
We're seeing that already with this attempt to, you know, get rid of whiteness. I mean, all of a sudden we're targets, and we didn't do anything. This is all based on something that happened long before we were born, but we're being demonized for it.
Exactly. That I agree with that, and it's almost seems like there's a, I don't want to say spiritual element, but it's like that's the way that people of color might that common base people that are low thinking, they might see it in that way, and that's the problem. Is that too many people are just base thinkers. They don't have any real intellect for critical thinking, you know, and that's the biggest reason why you can motivate hordes of races or even genders to just close ranks and think of themselves in that way. And
well,
to go against,
our school system,
you know, beyond reason.
Our school system for decades has not been teaching critical thinking to kids. So they're growing up into adults that have basically been conditioned throughout their entire school year to simply repeat and believe what they're being told.
Well, Mike, you know, you heard recently how one of the students says that we'll wait till you're all dead, meaning the people our age. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that.
Exactly. That's what you got to be afraid of. That once these people start voting, they're going to go right over the cliff, and they have no survival skills, no sense of self-preservation. You know, that they weren't taught that. And they're being led by the people that are going to take them out, take us out. And that's, anyway, but I just want to make a comment on the Reaganomics that you mentioned.
Yes.
That was sabotaged by Bush. Papa Bush was in charge. Reagan was already trying to just not get killed before he left office.
Well, he was also dealing with Alzheimer's.
Same way. Well, you know, maybe. I mean, that's a good way to say, hey, leave me alone. Just like McCain's doing, you know?
No, he really did have it. And the fact is that George Bush, the senior, really was running the White House behind. He was the power behind Reagan. Reagan was still put out there for the TV cameras and everything. But especially those last few years, Bush was really basically just running the place.
Right. You know, Mike, that's the reason why when they say the tariffs are not a good idea, because Baby Bush tried it, it didn't work.
Yes.
Well, yeah, because look who was in charge, Baby Bush. It was intentional to show the world that we must continue with this global economy. See what I mean? It was just a globalist thing, ploy, just to make people think that we can't do that. We can't go back to being America again.
Well, actually, the tariffs are having the opposite effect. They're forcing nations to go back to being sovereign, independent states. I mean, the tariffs are starting to come down. There's a domino effect that's already happening, and that's one of the reasons why the plunge protection team can't keep the stock markets up. People are getting very nervous, and they're dumping stocks in companies that are being hit by these foreign tariffs. This was a mistake to do at this time. And we're already feeling the consequences from it.
Once again, you know, if Trump is for real, the fact that I think the last time I called, I said that once this whole investigation thing is we've gone past that, we can get rid of Sessions, and that's exactly what happened. And I still have hope, you know, because of that.
Well, I'm afraid my disappointment in Trump precludes my enthusiasm for what you're saying. I'm glad he's firing Sessions. I hope they fire McCabe as an object lesson. But Trump has backtracked on so many of the things that he said as a candidate. First and most important, obviously, the war policy. He campaigned on getting us out of all these foreign entanglements. But, you know, so did Barack Obama with his you can take that to the bank comment. He campaigned on ending the wars. He got more wars. Donald Trump campaigned on ratcheting back the wars. We're getting more wars. So obviously the president is not in control of the war policy of this nation. The other campaign promise he made that I'm disappointed in is Hillary is not in jail yet. She's out there on a world tour promoting her book, and I think she's going to try and run again in 2020. Anyway, Curtis, we're going to let you go here. We got to do a break for commercials. We're going to close the phone lines for a while because I'm way behind on my talking points, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We've closed the phone lines because I'm way behind on my talking points. We may open them up a little later in the show. I just got an email from somebody clarifying that the story that Trump fired Tillerson via tweet is fake news and was put out by CNN and MSNBC. Tillerson was officially fired apparently last Friday. So that's that one. Now, getting back to all the Russia bashing, and we need to be concerned about this, Nikki Haley is now out there saying that Russia could use chemical weapons in New York. They're really ramping this up, and they're telegraphing a false flag. And guys, haven't the New Yorkers been through enough already? The World Trade Tower bombing, 9/11 itself, the homelessness, the illegal immigrants, the refugees. Pick another city, okay? Pick another city for this one. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has said his country is ready to resolve differences with the Saudi government as part of Tehran's desire for stability in the region. And of course, we know who wants instability in the region, but at least they're offering their hand out. Personally, at this point, with Saudi Arabia closely tied to the United States and moving closer to Israel, I don't think it's going to happen. But Tehran apparently wants to start building bridges with some of the other nations in the region ahead of what now seems to be an inevitable invasion. Now, U.S. CENTCOM Commander General Joseph Votel, basically, when he was testifying at the Senate Armed Services Committee, came out openly in favor of maintaining the current P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran. And Votel even warned over possible consequences if Trump withdraws from the treaty. like war. And Iran, of course, doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. They didn't have such a program. We've been hearing since the 1980s that Iran was just weeks away from a nuclear weapon. That's what Israel kept saying, and it never happened. It's just part of that demonization to go after the enemies here. Now, as you know, there was an attempted assassination on the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Rami Hamdallah, and the head of the Palestinian Authority's Intelligence Service General, Majid Faraj, immediately after they arrived in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday morning. And because the bomb was a roadside bomb, exploded after their convoy had passed, people are wondering, was it just a failed attempt, or is somebody sending a message? Certainly it looks like this would be a major problem for reconciliation with Hamas, but if that was the goal, it hasn't worked, because apparently Hamdallah and Ismail Haniyeh, the senior political leader of Hamas, spoke by phone and agreed that in all probability Israel was behind the explosion because it appeared to be the incident's main beneficiary. Now, as you know, down in Gaza, conditions are really terrible. Israel comes in like clockwork every 2.5 years and bombs the place. Now they're dealing with protesters with drones that drop tear gas. And they're calling it an unmanned weapons experiment. But they're basically flying these drones over protesters in Gaza and just dropping the tear gas on them from that way. It's time to bring back the ancient sport of falconry. Train the falcons to go after those drones. Now, as you know, Al Jazeera did a documentary in Great Britain on Britain's Israel lobby, and it caused quite a stir. And Al Jazeera has produced a similar documentary about the Israel lobby here in the United States of America. And it was created basically by having undercover people, taking a lesson from Project Veritas, undercover people pretending to be Israel supporters, getting in with people in the lobby and getting them to just talk on camera. And apparently it is a devastating documentary to the point where Alan Dershowitz is demanding censorship of this film. Alan, have you ever heard of something called the First Amendment? But basically, Dershowitz is out there saying, well, it needs to be re-edited to be more balanced. In other words, take out the corruption. Alan, you don't get to do that. We still have that First Amendment. And the American people need to understand we're living under foreign puppet rule, and we are feeling the pain and paying the price for it. Article coming out of the Real News is saying U.S. cowardice is preventing Middle East peace. A majority of United Nations members support a just resolution to the Israel and Palestine conflict, but U.S. political cowardice and the influential Israel lobby thwart it. This is from a veteran UN correspondent, Ian Williams. Now, Israel wants all the land. They don't want there to be a Palestine. Going all the way back to Golda Meir, where they used to say, there never was such a place as Palestine. It doesn't exist. They basically rode on in and took over part of the country under the slogan, a land without a people for a people without a land. Except there was a thriving culture already there that got displaced. And Israel has been working to sabotage a two-state solution with those illegal settlements in the West Bank. They're strategically placed to break up the land. There is no contiguous large piece of land left that could be declared a Palestinian state. So that's Israel's idea of the solving the Palestinian question. Just get rid of them all. Turn them into refugees, put them into other countries. Israel wants the West Bank. They want Gaza back. They want the Golan Heights. They want Lebanon up to the Litani River. We know who the aggressor is in the Middle East. Now, down in the Philippines, President Duterte is withdrawing the Philippines from the International Criminal Court. And basically, it has to do with the way the Philippines is handling the war on drugs. which is they're simply executing drug dealers as they find them, which, by the way, is a position that Donald Trump said he would support. Now, Kim Jong-un has basically announced what he is hoping to achieve with this meeting with Donald Trump. And basically, a South Korean official in their president's office revealed that Kim Jong-un wants a peace treaty with the United States that would formally end the Korean War. And the treaty would address the regime's security, the status of U.S. troops in South Korea, and their joint military drills, as well as North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The U.S. will never agree. The U.S. will never agree. They want the Koreas to remain divided. The U.S. needs chaos around the world to justify more wars and more war spending. Now, as we mentioned briefly yesterday, Donald Trump thinks a militarized space force is a great idea. And he said it when he was delivering a speech at San Diego's Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, which used to be the home of Top Gun. I don't know where they are now. And Trump said he was interested in establishing a space force to protect American military interests in outer space. And he said, this is a direct quote, "My new strategy for space recognizes that space is a warfighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea. You know, I was saying it the other day because we are doing a tremendous amount of work in space. Maybe we need a new force. We can call it the Space Force." And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a good idea. Maybe we'll have to do that. Now, there are a couple of reasons why not to do that. First of all, there are already weapons in space in defiance of international treaties, the so-called anti-satellite weapons. And setting aside the hideous cost that a space force would entail, which the U.S. doesn't have, crushed down with debt, there is a very good reason not to take war into space. And I hope that if somebody is listening to this program on behalf of the Trump administration, that you note the following reasons why I'm opposed to this idea. When you're fighting a war in the air and you blow up the other guy, the parts all fall to the ground, and that is the end of it. If you are in orbit and you shoot the other guy, some of that debris will fall back to Earth, and we don't know where, and everybody's still nervous about the Tiangong-1 Chinese space station, which is coming down soon. But a lot of that debris just goes into other orbits, and much of it is going to be too small to track. And at orbital speeds with highly inclined orbits, even a small piece of debris can destroy another satellite. If you take war into low Earth orbit, you could literally turn it into a no man's land, an orbiting minefield that will literally trap humankind on the surface of Earth. No more space exploration, no more communication satellites, no more spy satellites. This is a very, very dangerous thing to do. There's at least one incident where the space shuttle was damaged by just a little tiny fleck of paint, and it left a crater in one of the windshields. And there's already one known instance of two satellites colliding with each other. It's a junkyard up there already. But going up there into orbit and fighting a battle is going to basically put Earth off limits, or put space off limits for the future. Please don't do it. We have enough war down here to keep even the hardiest warhawks satisfied. And by the way, war in space won't look like Star Wars. I know they talked a lot about this sort of thing back during Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, and thank goodness that none of that stuff was developed. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this is a report from Zero Hedge. The super rich are rushing to buy nuclear-proof bunkers. And apparently the rush started after the key event of 2014. Basically, they've just started buying all these bunkers. It's a booming market. And they're buying these luxurious nuclear-proof bunkers all of a sudden. And if the politicians do go ahead and blow up the world, I suggest we survivors find all those bunkers and just pour concrete all over the hatches. End of story. Now, do you remember a while back, we here in Hawaii went through this big scare. In fact, there were T-shirts in the shopping malls. I survived the Hawaii ballistic missile. I should have gotten one of those. And what it was is the state's emergency alert system sent out an alert that there was an incoming ballistic missile. This is no drill. And it was something like 20 minutes before it was revealed that this was a mistake or a hoax or a test. And everybody's been asking, what's going on here? And it's getting a little complicated because for nearly 2 months, Governor David Ige's office has refused to release information showing how this Hawaii missile alert was handled. And Hawaii officials have repeatedly blamed a low-level state employee and a breakdown in his agency's leadership as the main cause. But for some reason, they've got something to hide. And I think we'd like to find out what it is. Now, they had a similar false alarm or test in Japan, and the all-clear recall, it was a mistake, took only 5 minutes there for a much larger country. Why did it take over 20 minutes here? And maybe that's what Ige is trying to withhold from public view by withholding this information. Now, let's talk about the economy. As I mentioned earlier in the day, the stock markets, again, rattled by Trump's tariffs, sank deep into the red. The plunge protection team can't keep propping them up. Between the tariffs and talk of a Fed rate hike, people are starting to think maybe it's the end of the bull market. The bears are coming home to roost and they want to get on out. Now, over in the Congress, Elizabeth Warren is trying to block this bank deregulation bill backed by more than a dozen Senate Democrats. And Chuck Schumer is putting pressure directly on Elizabeth Warren, saying, you know, just leave it alone. We've got to deregulate the banks. They got to make more money. They'll give us more campaign donations. And Warren basically said she's moving ahead. That's why she ran for the Senate. So good for her. Now, Trump is threatening Canada with raising the aluminum and steel tariffs even more unless Canada renegotiates NAFTA. And I can imagine right now Canada is getting pretty tired of the bullying coming from south of their border. I think the whole world is getting sick and tired of the bullying coming from the United States of America. Now, Huang Weiping, professor of the People's University of China, is out there warning that Trump's tariffs plan may shatter the pillars of the World Trade Order. He's saying the chaos that could result from it could be global. Angela Merkel is out there saying Europe must respond to the unilateral actions by the United States on trade. And she's already talking about how they're going to respond in a reciprocal fashion, meaning tariffs on American products. It could turn into a terrorist war. And again, this is absolutely the last thing the globalists want, because they started their push toward a one world government, new world order by globalizing the economy. And if the economies of nations start breaking apart and putting up tariff walls, that sets the whole New World Order globalist agenda back decades. Now, Nassim Nicholas Taleb is a philosophical pugilist. His new book, Skin in the Game, basically talks about bankers, bureaucrats, warmongers, and wonks. And he's basically saying the very best thing that could happen for our society is the bankruptcy of Goldman Sachs. And I would agree. These too big to fail, too big to jail banks are just pirates and plunderers. And they are one of the many forces behind the decline in the American standard of living. And it's a scam, just like the Federal Reserve. So, We really do need to see this whole system come crashing down and rebuild from start. It's way beyond repair. It can't be repaired. Trump's performance in office is proving that. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And skipping on back to the war on the independent media, the corporate media is now calling for Alex Jones to be deplatformed from all communication systems. This is a major, major attack on our First Amendment rights, and it's out in the open. And I'm thinking of that coffee mug that we have for sale in our little online store, and on it says, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it, and that is what is happening right now. The corporate media, the government, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, they have completely abandoned the Bill of Rights here. Now, I hold that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights represent the original contract with America, and that any government or anyone that is not operating in accord with the Bill of Rights is an illegal, illegitimate government. So, apparently, Donald Trump's new economic advisor, Kudlow, is saying, I would buy the dollar and sell gold. Well, we know where he's coming from. More work about Sessions. Okay, now getting on back to the economic news. Story coming out of Zero Hedge. The real retirement crisis is the elderly, for the most part, are broke. And this is a study from Go Banking Rates, and it reveals older people planning their retirement have cause for concern. 42% of Americans are facing their golden years with less than $10,000 in savings, and a lack of savings and planning what should have been an enjoyable time. It's going to be a period of stress and worry. And we know that Social Security isn't there. They're going to start cutting those payments. They have to. They don't have the money. Now, 2 years ago, the Wall Street Journal exposed the company Theranos as a fraud. And apparently, the CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, has finally been charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with massive fraud. And there's been a settlement. Theranos and Holmes have agreed to resolve the charges against them, and in addition to a penalty, Holmes has agreed to give up majority voting control over the company, as well as to a reduction of her equity, which combined with the shares she previously returned, materially reduces her equity stake. So she's not going to go to jail. They're just making her poorer, which I guess for a money junkie, that's pretty severe, stiff punishment there. Now, you know, there's been a big debate about the minimum wage here in the United States and how it should go up. Down in Australia, the businesses are saying, you've got to lower it. You've got to lower it. Currently in Australia, it's $18.29 an hour. That's their minimum wage. And the Australian businesses, especially the Retail Association and restaurant and catering industry, are saying, no, we need a wage cut. So Australia seems to be going down the same path toward economic fascism that the U.S. is. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. The phone lines are still closed. I'm probably going to open them at the bottom of the hour, but I got a bunch of stuff to get through. I just received an interesting email from a listener, and basically saying that Alex Jones is likely on Trump's radar. They may have just picked the wrong site to attack. Remember, during the campaign, Trump actually went on Alex Jones' show, which was a major coup for independent media. I'm not sure I agree with that, because Trump seems to have turned his back on the very same independent media that helped him defeat Hillary. He hasn't lifted a finger with all this net neutrality issue and all this obvious censorship. Not a peep out of him. Anyway, getting on back to the economic news. Bavaria wants to keep Chinese investors away from German companies. And apparently Bavarian authorities are considering new legislation which lowers the stake barrier for Chinese investors from the current 25% to 10% maximum share. This is reported in the outlet Augsburger Allgemeine. And apparently they're concerned about too much foreign interest over some of their iconic companies like BMW and Siemens. So they're starting to rein things in there as well. Back in Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf is basically walking around saying that she can't be prosecuted because she didn't get the warning of the ICE sweeps through official sources, therefore it doesn't constitute a leak, and therefore she can't be prosecuted. Well, yes, she can. She can be prosecuted under Title VIII. She can be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. Now, over at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, their director, Homan, is on the warpath against Nancy Pelosi for basically describing the ICE sweeps as terrorizing communities. And Homan basically came back and said, we're not arresting innocent people. If they're illegal, they're a criminal. And during the agency's recent operation in Los Angeles, 88% of the arrested offenders were convicted criminals, while overall 81% of all the arrests throughout all of California were criminals. So he says Pelosi's comments were way beyond the pale, and yes, they were. But just like is happening in Europe, this illegal immigrant refugee crisis is starting to tear our nation apart. Now, over in Baltimore, Baltimore is basically bankrupt. And they don't even have enough money to turn the heat on in the schools. The kids are going to school during the winter in the classrooms, parkas and mittens, trying to do their schoolwork that way. And somehow, Baltimore found money to hire lawyers to help illegal immigrants fight deportation. Baltimore also came up with the money to send busloads of school children to this anti-gun rally. Sounds to me like Baltimore is in Democratic hands right now. For one thing, they've got the highest per capita murder rate. Now, very interesting analysis has come on out. The Center for Immigration Studies is revealing that the cost of Trump's wall is going to be a push. We don't need to worry about getting funding from Mexico or anything, because the Center for Immigration Studies is saying that the cost of the $18 billion wall will be quickly balanced by the reduction of illegal immigrants who enter the country and enroll in public programs, as well as the costs associated with the crime being committed by the illegal immigrants. And CIS President Stephen Camarota told the New York Post, the wall will pay for itself, even if it only modestly reduced illegal crossings and drug smuggling. So there we are. I still think it would have been cheaper to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. Now, in a new ruling, a federal appeals court has upheld most of Texas law targeting sanctuary cities. And they're calling it the toughest state-based immigration measure of the country. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans allows police officers in Texas to ask people their immigration status during routine stops. And it also threatens Texas officials with jail time for not cooperating with federal immigration authorities. Now, those officials in Texas could be jailed already under Title VIII. We don't need new laws. The problem is the existing laws aren't being enforced. Okay. Let's see. Political Insider is now also reporting that Trump is ready to fire Jeff Sessions. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, you know, it's been part of the liberal agenda that we all get used to all sorts of bizarre ideas about sex and gender. There was that story about this student got kicked out of class for saying there are just two genders. And we're supposed to get used to the idea of there being a fluidity of genders and all kinds of, just be accepting. And apparently the latest one, and this is really weird, there's a guy who's out there saying that we should be accepting of zoophilia, otherwise known as bestiality, sex with non-humans. And apparently he's standing up there and saying that he had this romantic and sexual relationship with a dolphin. The guy's name is Malcolm Brenner, and he's featured in a new documentary called Dolphin Lover. And so that's the latest liberal political correctness craze. Getting absurd. Now, here is where we're getting into Aldous Huxley territory. Scientists are now suggesting that people in countries where refugees are flooding on in be dosed with oxytocin. This is the hormone produced by babies that makes their mothers love them. And if we're all being dosed with this, that we will no longer resent these refugees coming on in and raping our women and committing crimes and creating no-go zones. The globalists want to drug us all to accept the refugees. They'll probably make it mandatory like they're doing the vaccines. The problem is oxytocin is actually harmful. Small price to pay for the New World Order, I would imagine. Now, Italy's right-wing leader, this is in the aftermath of the elections, Matteo Salvini, the head of the rebranded Italian party, the League, is saying EU policies robbed us of our future and hope. And I can see how that would be very obvious to people living in Europe. They've lost their sovereign status. Brussels continues to try and push for a federalized European Union, where countries like France and Germany and Italy are reduced to the status of states like Texas and Pennsylvania and Hawaii. So what's happening to the EU today is a replay of what happened here in the United States, because we started out as a collection, a confederation of sovereign independent states, and within the states had all the authority. And the federal government's authority was basically to deal with arguments between the states, and in time of war to attend the national defense. And over time, we've been turned into this federalized collection of deliberately weakened and impotent states, all ruled with an iron fist from Washington, D.C. Now, up in Germany, there's a Kurdish youth group, Kurdish refugees. And they're saying now that if Germany doesn't do something about Turkey's incursion into Kurdish Syria, the Kurdish youth group in Germany will turn Europe into rubble and ash. That's a direct quote. So how's that open borders thing working out for you there, Germany? Aren't you just glad you let all these refugees in without any kind of vetting whatsoever? Now, Sunday, 60 Minutes interviewed Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and people are calling it a train wreck. Bill Ayers is out there declaring that the 60 Minutes interview shows that Betsy DeVos is a clear white supremacist. That's the new tar and feathers word that's out there. Back in the 50s, it was commie. Then it was anti-Semite. That one's wearing out, so now it's clear white supremacist. What they're trying to do is drive Betsy DeVos out of the Secretary of Education office because they're trying to salvage Common Core. Because Betsy DeVos thinks it's a bad idea, and it is. They're not teaching our kids. They're indoctrinating them. They're propagandizing them. They're not giving them good skills. The way they teach basic math is insane. They're literally crippling these kids' minds. They're making it so hard to do simple, basic calculations. Now, as you know, the gun grabbers are out there pushing as hard as they can. In fact, given that they're not getting any traction with Parkland, I'm expecting another mass shooting any time now. I think what happened at the Veterans Hospital in California, that was a real deal. The guy was suffering PTSD. He'd just been kicked on out. But again, it's a huge backfire. NRA memberships have surged since the Parkland shooting. Gun sales are way, way up. This could actually pull Remington out of bankruptcy. The Second Amendment Foundation sees a 200% surge in 18 to 20-year-old members post-Florida, meaning the young generation is really starting to wake up to what has been going on. Article over at Restore American Glory is saying that Walmart and Dick's are just making the problem worse. They're basically taking a stance against guns. They're refusing to sell guns and ammunition to people under the age of 21. There is no law right now that says you have to be 21 to own a gun. Heck, you can join the Army and play with all the guns you want when you're 18. But of course, this is going to be a boon to the small mom and pop gun stores who are going to basically say, Second Amendment right, I will sell you a gun and I will sell you ammunition. Please consider taking a gun safety course. Now, former NBA basketball star Shaquille O'Neal has come out against gun control. Shaquille believes that this would not eliminate gun violence and would only increase the risk of possible mass shootings. He's absolutely right. If you disarm the population, the crazies are going to have a field day. It's just this nationwide kill zone because people who want guns will always be able to get them or to make them. For one thing, they can go down to Mexico and pose as a drug lord and get a military weapon courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer through the Fast and Furious program. Now, the Daily Mail in Great Britain finally tracked down former Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson. And basically, he resigned before he could be investigated, and now he is enjoying a $60,000 a year pension, which he's going to continue to receive unless he's hit with a federal charge of failing to act, which legal experts say will be hard to prove. Not really, it's on video. But apparently Peterson is enjoying his retirement. He was spotted heading to a strip mall wearing a baseball cap, a pink t-shirt, shorts, and a fanny pack with a female companion. U.S. taxpayers gave abortion groups $1.6 billion over the 3 years from 2013 to 2015. This is a new government report from the Government Accountability Office. I guess they weren't making enough money selling baby body parts. And the problem with that, of course, is there are many taxpayers who do not agree with abortion. And why are they being forced to subsidize it? That's a serious issue. Now, again, political correctness, you're going to love this one. In celebration of International Women's Day on March 8th, Femmes en Créa, an advocacy group for women in the creative field, has organized an ad industry-wide equity poker tournament. But there's a twist. The kings and queens all have the same value. And in fact, they're actually printed special cards where there's a king on one end and a queen on the other. And so they're basically saying, this levels the playing field, empowers women. Well, on that same theory, then in chess, we should take the queen, which is the most powerful piece on the board, and it should be demoted to match the king, which is one of the weakest pieces on the chessboard. After all, fair is fair. Snow piles up in the Northeast. The blizzard begins winding down. And I've been in communication with my family members, and this was a nasty one. Fortunately, most of my family are away from the coast. But apparently, Wilmington, Massachusetts got 29.5 inches. Boston got 14.5 inches. Worcester saw 21.8 inches, both of which broke daily records for those cities. Hartford, Connecticut saw 7 inches. Maine, 14 inches were recorded in Bangor, and 11.5 inches in Portland. Over in the Albany area, they've set more snow, daily snow records. Now, new estimates are revealing that more snow is covering North America than scientists previously thought. Can you say start of a new ice age? I knew you could, but nearly 1,500 cubic miles of snow piled up across North America every year, especially this year. If you were to pile it on Ohio only, it would be 150 feet deep. There's a lot of snow out there. Remember back in March 20th, 2000, the banner headline, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Great Britain is getting a warning. They're calling it the Beast from the East, and it will cover the entire country in heavy snow. And the carbon Nazis are still out there pushing this nonsense. Story out of USA Today, basically saying that all this extreme cold and heavy snow here in the U.S. is because the Arctic is warming. See, human activity is warming the Arctic, and the Arctic is causing all this cold weather. Well, I have a very simple thought experiment. Their idea is that the melting ice in the Arctic is flowing south here to the United States and becomes the snow and rain. That's their claim. Well, right now in the Arctic, there is nothing melting. They keep sending expeditions up there to document the melting, and it is spring. There should be a little bit of melting. But if it's melting, if it's above the freezing point and it blows down here to the United States, what is the mechanism in this global warming world by which it freezes into snow and ice? That's the hole in their story. But again, they're counting on a generation raised by Common Core to not have the scientific wherewithal to figure out that they're being lied to. Okay, we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines because I've gotten through most of the important talking points. Now, a few days ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger was announcing he was going to file lawsuits against Big Oil, charging the oil companies with first-degree murder because their carbon pollution is warming the earth and killing people. And mind you, Schwarzenegger is no climate expert or climate scientist, although nobody would stop him from playing one on TV if he chose to do so. But the issue is that more and more people are starting to realize there is something wrong with all of this nonsense because of the cold weather. We've had all these record cold winters in a row. And we have all these studies showing that the sun is cooling. We're heading into a Maunder minimum. The evidence is right before our eyes. And yet corporate media like USA Today are still out there hoping that we have been brainwashed by the public school system to simply repeat and believe what we're told by those TV screens, rather than thinking for ourselves. So go ahead and think. That's a revolutionary act right there. Thinking for yourself. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And yes, the phone lines are open again. I got through most of the important talking points. Getting over to the world of computers and computer software and all the stuff that's going on there, we've been hearing more and more about robots in the retail space, and has turned out to be the case with computerized cars and everything else. The IT isn't very good, and security researchers have discovered that it's very easy to hack into popular robots that could basically threaten customers, show hardcore porn, demand a ransom, curse out the customers. So they even did a ransomware attack on one of the machines. Now, Microsoft has admitted, with their usual sheepish grin, it incorrectly upgraded some Windows 10 users to what is called version 1709. And apparently it was done despite the users having specifically paused update operations in their OS settings, which, given how many of these updates and patches have caused far more damage than good, might not be a bad idea. But apparently Microsoft has the means to override your selection. And they did force this update on people who did not want it. Now, Verizon, a few years ago, Verizon started expanding corporately, and they acquired a bunch of other companies. And in the process, their cash position was strained, to put it delicately. And they basically allowed their broadband infrastructure to fall apart. And apparently there was a lawsuit, And the new settlement requires Verizon to replace bad, outdated cable, defective equipment, and faulty backup batteries. Now, we have the same problem out here with Spectrum. And we know that Spectrum actually got sued by the state of New York for false advertising, for advertising certain speeds for certain costs and failing to deliver. We pay for 300 megabits per second service because of the high demand all this media does, but we're only getting about 60 megabits per second. And every time we complain, they insist it must be something wrong with my equipment, but I've gone into some of my neighbors' homes and plugged into their cable modems, and it's the same everywhere. When you lose a legitimate regulatory oversight on corporations, they just start doing whatever they feel they want to do to maximize their profitability. Nobody's keeping watch. We're living under fascism, which is when corporate power and government power are aligned together against the general population. That's not my definition. That comes from Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk. We're going to go to the phones now. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello to you. Oh, hello to you both. I have an awkward question for you about the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
I had chatted with an acquaintance of mine yesterday or the day before, whatever the case was, and they went to it was an interesting conversation, to say the least. They went to their community bank or whatever the case was. It was not a big, major name one for that matter. And they went to deposit a check, as it were, for like, let's say over $1,000, maybe $2,000 or something.
Yeah.
And even though, as I understand it, they do have a guideline at the bank that they have to have at least 200 on hand available upon request.
Yes. Regardless
of how big the check was. And, well, along with the check was for that amount or better, for that matter. Let me correct it that way. And so otherwise there's like a 5 or 7 day hold for processing for whatever reason it might be. And then they mentioned that when they talked to someone on the phone about that, when they went to check on it, they were told that the check had to pass through the Federal Reserve. And I thought, okay, that's kind of odd. And so I said, well, I guess you're going to have to find out more information about why that is. What does that have to do with the check clearing the bank or whatever, so it's available to you? And so I guess they're going to have to research that. But I'm wondering, since you're something more familiar with this than I would be, why would a check like that amount have to go past the Federal Reserve just to be deposited into your account from another one?
Well, I'm actually unaware of that being the case, and we need to take a break. No, I got one more minute. I'm unaware of that being the case. The only thing that would make sense, I can't imagine the Federal Reserve is simply looking at every check that comes along.
That's what I'm...
Okay, I keep hearing noise on the line. Okay, anyway, the only thing that makes sense is if some path of the payee, or rather the payor, goes through a Federal Reserve bank, at which point it would make perfect sense that they would send it to the Fed to be cleared. Who issued the check?
Well, they didn't tell me.
Okay, I think that's likely what's going to happen. You know, larger checks, they do put a hold on them just to make sure the funds actually do transfer across. They did it with the check we got from our insurance people for the stolen Honda. Anyway, now we have to take a break. Francis, thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm getting an email on this issue about internet not performing. And this person says their internet has gone out 4 times in the last 45 minutes. Each time he has to reboot to get it back. I don't know if he means reboot the cable modem or reboot his computer. Somebody may be just moving the cables around, and that does happen. But he says it's very annoying because he's working on a large project, and he's basically with Comcast Xfinity. And we've heard bad things about them as well. The infrastructure is in decay. The U.S. invented the internet, and we have some of the worst performing internet in the world. Over in Japan, gigabit into the home is now the norm. Now, apparently, U.S. Transportation Command is going to start migrating their data to Amazon's secret cloud region. Now, Microsoft had bid for that job for their cloud, and they put up a fuss, but it finally went to Amazon. I don't think this is a very smart thing to do. We know how weak and prone to hacking these cloud machines have been. Even the so-called secret section has had a problem. And if we're going to fight a war, our enemies' hackers, if they can get into that Amazon secret cloud, they're going to know where our logistics support is going. And they can deduce a tremendous amount of important information about the conduct of the war from that. I think it's a reckless thing. We're going to take a phone call now. Steve in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. We love your show. It's really fantastic. I just had this one question. I didn't know if you ever listened to Rick Wiles on his show called True News, because last night he was saying that he believes we are very close to a nuclear war because of the way that the U.S. is so much pushing its weight again around against Russia in that Middle East.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Now we've got this nonsense from Great Britain where they want to boycott the World Cup in Russia. They want more sanctions against Russia. Yeah, we're pushing toward a war. We're very, very close. We could even see it happen, before the end of the month.
Okay. I told my wife, well, our best security is just to pray to God and ask for his protection.
Well, that's one way to do it. And obviously, I don't know if you were listening to the show when I reported, Nikki Haley up at the United Nations is actually saying Russia is planning a chemical weapon attack on New York. I mean, that's... They're just escalating this propaganda as hard as they can. And they're not getting traction with it. Nobody's believing them anymore. But they're just going through the motions and saying, well, we believe this and we're going to act on it unilaterally.
Thanks to people like you, more and more people are waking up. So I'm so very thankful that you still are around.
Well, me too. And we had a close call a few years ago, but I'm still here and I'm still doing the work. So thank you very much for the kind words and for the phone call, Steve. We're going to let you go. Now, apparently, according to this article in Blacklisted News, there is a new bill called the Cloud Act that is another attack on our Fourth Amendment protections to communication privacy. And it basically would allow police at home and abroad to seize cross-border data without following the privacy rules where the data is stored. And this is a biggie because some countries, like Iceland, are trying to set themselves up as data centers with strict privacy protections. And again, this is all about spying on ordinary, law-abiding American citizens. Because real criminals and real terrorists already know the net and devices are compromised. They're going to find other means of communication. We proved a few years ago it's actually very easy to write encryption the NSA cannot break. So it's all about spying on law-abiding citizens. I mean, look how much information they had from the accused shooter in the Parkland school. And they didn't do anything about it. They're just too busy trying to sabotage Donald Trump and keep watch on the American people because evidently they're afraid right now. They're afraid the party's coming to an end, and it is. Now, we've talked about this story before, but there's a new wrinkle. There is this 35-year-old scientist, official actually, Timothy Cunningham. He's a high-ranking employee with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's the official responsible for handling Zika and Ebola emergencies, and he's been missing for nearly 2 weeks. Cunningham went home from work claiming he was sick and has not been seen or heard from since. Now, last week, the Atlanta Police Department issued a missing persons notice through their Facebook page, and it's received 2,000 shares, but no leads. Now, remember, about the same time this was happening, the CDC's special Ebola isolation plane made a trip from Atlanta to Little Rock, Arkansas, and back. Now, somebody apparently started the fake news that this missing scientist was passed over for promotion and that he was probably just off somewhere cooling his heel. But this is coming out of the Atlanta Police Department. But CDC is saying, no, he wasn't passed over. In fact, he was promoted quite recently. So something is going on. And whether this is a continuation of certain scientists who are a threat to the medical industrial complex meeting untimely ends, or if one of these refugees has brought Ebola into this country, that's the worst case scenario. But something is going on. Article coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain, wagging its finger at us in the United States of America and talking about why U.S. healthcare is more expensive than all other wealthy nations, but our life expectancy is the lowest. And that's because healthcare in the U.S. is a business. They're there to make money. They need you to be sick all the time. They need you to be chronically ill so that you're constantly having to buy medicines and treatments. In those other countries, the healthcare system is about the care of health. But ever since Nixon signed that health maintenance organization bill for his good friends at Kaiser Permanente, it's become a profit center. And what's profitable is for people not to actually be cured, or for perfectly healthy people to be ordered to buy medicines they don't really need, like the vaccines. I think it's up to 49 different vaccinations you have to have by the age of 16. And the debate is raging on. And apparently Dr. Peter Hodez, who's the dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, has declared vaccine skeptic groups as hate groups. And he specifically targeted the National Vaccine Information Center, and he says it's a hate group. And these anti-vaccine organizations camouflage themselves as a political group, but they're hate groups. They hate our family. They hate your children. They want them to be sick. It is a little bit over the top. But again, the evidence continues to accumulate. These medications are not only ineffective in most cases, they're dangerous. Because vaccine manufacturers are indemnified against civil lawsuits. If your child is injured by a vaccine, you have to go to the special vaccine court. And the vaccine court has, in fact, settled quite a few of these suits. The money isn't great. There's a cap on it. But the vaccine makers, there's no financial incentive for them to make sure their products are safe before they put them on the market. Now, apparently over in Florida, there was a bill to mandate vaccination of all school children with the ineffective and dangerous HPV vaccine. Now, this vaccine has been known to cause illnesses like sleeping sickness. And again, they're giving this vaccine to kids who are way too young to be sexually active, and it wears off. They need another one at the age they become sexually active. But money is money, and vaccinating them at school age doubles the amount of money pouring into the system here. Unfortunately, the bill was defeated thanks to grassroots efforts and independent media. And according to Green Med Info, there were two identical bills submitted to the Florida Senate and the House of Representatives mandating HPV vaccines for school children. All four bills were defeated. Well, that's one small step for medical freedom. Another article here, Blacklisted News. Lead exposure is linked to 412,000 premature deaths in the U.S. each year. Now, I remember when I was a kid, they were only beginning to just understand how toxic lead was. We had, believe it or not, the tinsel on our Christmas trees was made out of crinkled lead foil, except for that one year that the Air Force dropped all that Mylar all over our town. There were lead-based paints, and lead started to be taken out of our environment, but apparently it's still there. And an article in The Lancet is saying there is still serious lead exposure issues, and it leads to cardiovascular disease deaths in the United States. So they're saying the reason it's overlooked is it's ubiquitous. It's pretty much everywhere. Everywhere that you go, there's some lead. There's lead in your car batteries, although obviously you're not playing with that. But we've toxified the environment. And again, that is something that happens when a country descends into fascism, where corporate interest and government interests are aligned together against the general public. Any system that is supposed to protect the public goes away. That's why we have the Minerals Management Service looking the other way, while the manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon goes 4 years without regularly scheduled maintenance. We keep seeing it time and time again. The financial system. Yes, the SEC did charge this lady, and they got a settlement, but they looked the other way for 12 years, while Bernie Madoff with the loot was cheating his customers and his employees. You look at the infrastructure, the decline and the quality of life. You look at how unsafe some of our streets and roads and bridges have become. We really are an empire in decline. And the problem is that in its death throes, the U.S. government may just lash out and just take the rest of the world with it. Now, over in Italy, near Mount Vesuvius, there has been a seismic swarm of earthquakes, and it's got people very nervous. In fact, there was one instance where a nursery school was evacuated because one of the larger tremors was felt by pupils, parents, and residents. Now, the director of the Vesuvius Observatory, Dr. Francesca Bianco, is making an effort to calm fears among local residents, saying, this has been going on for a number of years. You really don't have to worry about it. That sounds like more of a political and economic message than actual science, because anytime you've got a volcano with a known history of destructive eruptions and you're starting to get earthquakes around it, you need to sit up and take notice. That certainly was the case with Mount St. Helens, which was rocking and rolling the seismographs for a couple of months before it finally blew. That's why they keep such a close watch seismographically on the Yellowstone supervolcano. They're trying to figure out what, if, and when. Of course, if Yellowstone blows, it's going to be over for most of the country, according to the latest estimates. Now, some of the articles over here. This is apparently, this is a good one. Maryland State Senator Cheryl Kagan wanted to get on the hashtag #MeToo, and she claimed a lobbyist inappropriately sexually groped her at a bar in Annapolis on March 1st. The guy she was accusing went back to the bar, which had a security camera system. They still had the video of the encounter, and it shows he just gave her a hug. So we need to be cautious about all these women coming forward and saying, oh, he did this, he did that. They want a moment of fame, or they want a moment of revenge, or they just want to just be part of the trend, the fad. I remember back during the militant feminist movement of the 1990s, when the big thing was rape. Oh, it's a rape epidemic, which actually, according to the crime stats, didn't. And there were so many false accusations of rape. There were rape hoaxes and rape fraud because they wanted to get on Donahue and Oprah. And there was actually a T-shirt that was very popular among the feminists, potential rape survivor. They all wanted in on the victimhood. And it's just, and this is more of the same. Now, I will grant you, there is inappropriate sexual behavior. It looks like Harvey Weinstein really did what he's been accused of by many people. And apparently, New York is considering pressing charges for some of what he did. But a lot of times, yeah, women do lie. And I know back in the 1990s, I mean, the feminist propaganda was, women never lie, men are liars, women never lie. If they say they've been raped, they've been raped. There was a interesting rape case against a guy named William Kennedy Smith, I think it was. I could be wrong on the name. And it was in all the newspapers, and it was being used literally to distract from the trial of Manuel Noriega, who'd been kidnapped from Panama, was literally in the courtroom across the hall. And the lawyers for the defense were doing what they called the Victoria's Secret defense, which is they were holding up all the bras and panties. So, of course, all the reporters went in there. Nobody went on into Noriega's trial, where he was talking about U.S. government drug running that was using Panama as a stopover. And when put on the witness stand, the alleged victim was asked, when did you realize that you'd been raped? And she said, well, basically, I went to bed with him the night before, and we had sex, and the next morning at breakfast, he was ignoring me, and that's when I realized I'd been raped. So you can see how it just really gets out of hand, and we have to be careful. Find the facts, find the evidence before we assume somebody is either lying or tell the truth, because you can do a lot of damage with a false accusation. I'm glad that bar still had the video. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, the TSA has the authority, you know, because of those constitution-free zones around our borders. The TSA can take your electronic device and search it. Well, apparently now they're starting to do it on domestic flights, even if you're not leaving the country. If you're flying from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, TSA can grab your electronic device and search it. Now, I have an old Windows XP netbook. That's my traveling computer. It's very small. It's got a little padded case on it because TSA up in Seattle dropped and ruined a very expensive laptop, which I didn't even get an apology for that. So I leave everything else at home. But it is getting kind of ridiculous out there. I miss the days when smartphones actually had a little port where you could plug in a memory stick to keep things on. But I guess they decided not to allow us to have that freedom to take data off the phone. Apparently there's a pilot program underway where your driver's license is actually going to be a file on your smartphone, and the police are going to be able to ping your phone remotely, I assume over Wi-Fi, Bluetooth won't reach, in order to see if you have a valid driving license. And they'll be able to just go down the street, ping, 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 ping. Oh, you're driving without a license, here's a huge ticket. I have two concerns with that. First of all, it forces drivers to leave their smartphone enabled for Wi-Fi, which is going to drain their batteries faster. And second, hackers inevitably get into these systems. Hackers could duplicate this very easily and start collecting driver's license information about people. For example, let's say I'm in Las Vegas and somebody has driven up from Los Angeles in their own car, or it doesn't even need to be their own car. I could be at the airport, pinging their cell phones as they get off the airplane in Las Vegas. I now know people who are not at home to protect their property back in Los Angeles, where my accomplice is ready with a crowbar and a sledgehammer and a big bag for all the goodies. That's the other problem that I have with it. People don't seem to really think these ideas all the way through. They say, oh, we can do this. All right, let's do it. It has a downside. Look at all the issues they're having with virtually no security on car computer systems, and apparently now the retail robots. You could get a hacker to program one of these retail robots, could turn around and cause somebody serious injury. All right, we're going to take one last very quick phone call. Dan in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Yeah, I'll be real quick. Apparently a judge in Florida is going to release the video of the Parkland shooting, some of the outside footage.
Okay. Well, that doesn't really tell us that much.
Yeah, it's a limited hangout. They may even show footage from a drill or one of the numerous drills they had. So, who knows? Anyways, I'll leave you with that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, we know there's a cover-up going on in place. Remember, we had Wolfgang Halbig on this show. He designed that camera system, and he told us where those cameras were. And by the way, that video has been relinked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. So there's the music. It's time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I am sure that he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you, and I urge all of you to take what you learn here at Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com, and you just share it with everybody that you know. We're literally in a war for the truth. We're in a war for the future of not only the United States of America, but the entire world. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.